This month, April, our theme is diversity and inclusion. Now, I'm still continuing my series on fasting and feasting, but I want to share this with you particularly. This quote says, "Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance." You have that experience, I would imagine, where you've been someplace with a bunch of people but not felt included? Yes? Or you know what it feels like to be left out also, right? So we are in the Centers for Spiritual Living looking at the opportunity of expanding our consciousness of diversity and inclusiveness. You know, the song that Bodhi sang this morning that's his, Deep Inside We're All the Same, you know, we have so much wonderful, rich, beautiful uniqueness and diversity around us. But you know, if you need surgery, when somebody opens you up to do surgery on you, they really can't tell where you grew up, or what language you speak, or what your religion is, or your sexual orientation, or your political preferences, or your race, or your ethnicity. On the inside, we are what we are, human beings. And there is something even more basic than that. And that is, when we personally, individually, take a moment to set aside our identifications with all those things and with the physical body that we are wearing right now, this spacesuit we're manifesting in, when we set aside all of our history, all of our opinions about ourselves, when we even set aside our experience and our opinions of our culture and our country and our planet, and we just move our awareness into the energy of being, into the sense of awareness, that place where we live in that sense of awareness is exactly the same as everyone else's. We are in the one, in that place. So although all of our individual identities are essential and important to us being in this time and space right here and now, or we would be doing something else, there is also a place that it's very important for us to be able to step into where the oneness dwells beyond all our sense of differences. Are you with me here so far? Okay, so I want to start off by telling you that I am still on fasting and feasting, and today we're talking about fasting from resistance and feasting on receptivity. On receptivity. Resistance, you know, is when we push something away from us. Receptivity is when we're available and we're not pushing anything away. So I want to start, first of all, to find out how you are with looking at new things. So this is a management skills test. There are only 4 questions. Tells whether you're qualified to be, quote, a professional. Professional anything, I guess. The first question, how do you put a giraffe into a refrigerator? The correct answer is, you open the refrigerator door, put the giraffe in, and close the door. This question tests whether you tend to do simple things in an overly complicated way. Question 2, how do you put an elephant into a refrigerator? Wrong answer. Open the refrigerator, put in the elephant, and close the refrigerator door. The correct answer is, open the refrigerator, take out the giraffe, put in the elephant, and close the door. This tests through your ability to think through the repercussions of your actions. Question 3. The Lion King is hosting an animal conference. All the animals attend except one. Which animal does not attend? The correct answer is the elephant. The elephant is in the refrigerator. This question tests your memory. Okay, even if you didn't get the first 3 questions right, you still have one more chance with a final question. There is a river you must cross, but it's inhabited by crocodiles. How do you manage it? The correct answer is you swim across. All the crocodiles are attending the animal conference. This tests whether you learn quickly from your mistakes. According to Anderson Consulting Worldwide, around 90% of the professionals they tested got all 4 questions wrong. But many preschoolers got several correct answers. Anderson Consulting says this conclusively disproves the theory that most professionals have the brains of a 4-year-old. When we are receptive, we're open to learning, we're open to discovering, we're open to seeing things differently. And the wonderful thing about life is that it gives you so many opportunities to do that, to learn, to change, to discover, to grow, to trip over yourself and get up again, to discover how not to trip the next time, all that sort of thing. And I think that what we're looking at then, when we're looking at resistance and receptivity, is we're really looking at fear versus love, or love versus fear. Are we inhabiting receptivity, which is open, or are we inhabiting resistance, which is fearful? The reason we hold something away from us is because we're afraid of it. It's unfamiliar. We don't like it. We don't know about it, or we've already judged it based on something that happened before or something we heard about that happened before. A Course in Miracles says every communication is either an extension of love or a call for love, one or the other. Now, there are lots of things that we might think are not, they're much more evil than a call for love in terms of how they show up and what they look like. And I found this yesterday on the internet is an interesting story from a guy in Australia, I believe it is. And he says this is his blog. Zig Ziglar says, every obnoxious act is a cry for help. He says, wow, what an amazing way to reframe being attacked. It's not easy, mind you, in the heat of the moment, but imagine how different life would be if we lived with that sort of compassion. Because the tendency is to take it personally, right? And sometimes, and when something's coming at you, when some words are coming at you, it can feel very personal. Well, he says about 25 years ago, I was physically attacked in a case of mistaken identity. At the time, I was working as a youth worker on the streets of inner Sydney. This enraged guy held me up against a wall with one fist around my neck and a knife pointed at my jugular. He demanded his money back. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, but he wasn't buying it. Something amazing happened in that moment. Among the many emotions I had, the strongest was sadness. I thought to myself, this guy must be in trouble to be acting like this. And I spontaneously relaxed my whole body. It went so limp that his hand fell off my neck, like water. And after a little more, he finally gave up and said that the guy he planned to kill looked just like me. It was a happy ending, at least for me. It struck me that this is a metaphor for not taking things personally. Anger is almost always a case of mistaken identity. Everything that annoys or enrages us in other people is something we haven't faced in ourselves. Getting involved in other people's anger is like the Irishman who found two people brawling in the street and asked, is this a private fight or can anyone get involved? Another person's anger is not your fight. It's like at the zoo, don't feed the lions. Don't feed anger. It's a misplaced primal scream. Feel the real hunger, which is a plea for understanding. It's their cry for help. The question is how we answer the cry. It starts with compassion. I'm not talking about pity or pop psychologizing someone in the heat of their rage. That will make it worse. I'm talking about genuinely feeling compassion for the other person and hearing their pain. You can't take away someone else's pain, but it's amazing how much compassion helps. Next time you're attacked, you have a choice. You can attack back and end up in a smackdown of mistaken identity, or you can feel compassion. A Course in Miracles says, every communication is either an extension of love or a call for love. Treat every interaction this way, and there will be so much less suffering. Every attack is a cry for help. Make your every word an extension of love. And then he ends, Don Miguel Ruiz sums it up perfectly in the 4 agreements. Don't take anything personally. Nothing others do is because of you. What others say and do is a projection of their own reality, their own dream. When you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. It doesn't necessarily change the experience you're having in the moment itself, but it changes our perception of the experience we're having, the way that we meet it. And so, extending that kind of compassion takes us beyond the place where we're living in fear or love. Now, I chose this picture. This is from, I believe, Vietnam or Cambodia, this picture. Now, you could choose to be in either love or fear about being up on those hands that are there as a foundation of support. And yet, think of the view. Think of the beauty. Yeah, it might be hard to get up there. You might be concerned about falling off. But you have a choice about whether to be in terror or whether to look around you and see how amazing it is. What happens with resistance is that resistance makes us tense. And that means it increases fear and pain. It expands them. It puts our attention on those instead of on where we want to be, who we want to be, what we want to be feeling and experiencing at the moment. We've heard the expression, what you resist persists, or what goes around comes around. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that it's never appropriate to intervene in something or to hold someone accountable for their actions or behavior. The difference isn't that, it's the place that it comes from in us, the place that the holding accountable comes from. So it's a choice that we have that never expires. Always in our lives, we are, with every thought, with every word, with every action, everything is either coming out of love or coming out of fear. Sometimes fear is gentle annoyance, or it looks like a bad mood, or not feeling well. But there's something in there. There's something in that that is resistant to what is. There's something in there that is fearful about what is, and so pushes it away. Does that make sense? In 1 John, it says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made in perfect love. Now, I would take issue with that last sentence because I think we're all made in perfect love. But we lose track of it when we're in fear. We feel endangered when we're in fear. Do you know you can be vulnerable and not be endangered? It's amazing what's possible for us. Wayne Dyer said, by surrendering, you create an energy field of receptivity for the solution to appear. And our founder, Ernest Holmes, said, behind all is a unity. Through all is a diversity. Saturating all is a divinity. Marilyn, would you step up here for just a second? I want to show you something. So, put your hands up against mine, all right? Now, if I push against you, you're likely to push back or resist, right? So push on me, okay? So now we've created this competition, right? Who's going to be stronger? Who's going to have more endurance? Who's going to last longer? It actually makes the pushback stronger the more you resist. Okay, now go ahead and push. Okay, now go ahead and push. Okay, now what I want to show you, and maybe you could see it and maybe you couldn't, especially if you're over here. When I let her push, I don't step back. I don't retreat. I stand in my groundedness and presence, but I don't let her push move me. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. You can sit down. Yeah. No, I'm not going to make you stand there for the rest of the talk. So when we are present and we are grounded and we're in that, that's like him relaxing his whole body. That's the Aikido kind of energy, where the energy that's coming at you actually goes on. It goes by or it goes through, and yet we're not dissolved. Now, that isn't easy, so I'm not claiming that that's always how I react to that. You've probably seen me sometime when I didn't, you know? And the idea isn't that we have to be perfect in our non-resistance or in our receptivity, but that awareness awakens greater possibilities. It gives us more elbow room. There's an ancient Zen story. In ancient times, there was a conquering army going through villages wreaking havoc and mayhem. The soldiers killed indiscriminately and were exceptionally harsh with monks, taking special care to humiliate and torture them before killing them. When the rest of the army arrived in town, the general asked for a report. His subordinate replied, "The population is subdued and terrified." This gave the general some satisfaction. His subordinate continued, "In the local monastery, all the monks have fled, except one." Hearing this, the general became furious. He rushed to the monastery to meet the monk who dared defy him. And when he saw the monk, he pulled his sword out and pushed it toward his stomach and hissed in a low but terrifying voice, "Don't you know who I am? I could take this sword and run it through your belly without blinking an eye." The monk was not fazed. He replied gently, "And don't you know who I am? I could have your sword run through my belly without blinking an eye." The general, awed by the monk's deep spiritual presence, bowed deeply and left the monastery in peace. There is another story similar to this one, where a great samurai warrior comes to the monastery and says to the old monk there, "Teach me about heaven and hell." And the old monk says, "Teach you? You couldn't possibly be taught. You're dirty, you're ignorant, you're violent." And the samurai was enraged at that response, and he drew out his sword to cut off the monk's head. And the monk says, "Here lies hell." And at that moment, the samurai was so overwhelmed by the fact that the monk would risk his life in order to teach him, dropped his sword and went to his knees in front of the monk. And the monk said, "And here lies heaven," in the surrender. So when we're talking about non-resistance and surrender, we're not talking about having a mandate to ignore what needs to be dealt with. It's not about pretending it isn't there or minimizing it or turning away from it and whistling a happy tune and ignoring it. It's not about that. It's about the attitude or the place that we respond from. This little message says, "Be powerful." What if you tuned more into your receptivity instead of resistance? So, if we need to respond to something that requires an intervention or needs to be stopped or needs to be dealt with, it's the attitude that we come to that with. The first thing is to, and this is a big, big thing to try, is to assume good intent. Now, that can be really tough, because sometimes good intent is the exact opposite of what you're seeing. But let's look at it from another perspective. Sometimes what looks like an attack that's coming at us or toward our people or whatever it might be, if we recognize that that attack, that anger, that whatever it is, comes from fear, then we see the hell that's happening over there. And we can assume that the good intent behind that is for some kind of protection that this one feels that they need. Their good intent is to preserve themselves or something they imagine they need to preserve. They hope to forward themselves in some way with this behavior that is abhorrent or frightening. But behind it, there is a desire, the same desire that we hold for safety, for well-being, for security. for kindness. And so we can be taking action that needs to be taken from a place of love, or if that's too difficult, from a place of compassion, or at least receptivity to the hellish fear that underlies that kind of anger or cruelty or defensiveness. Are you still following me here? Is this making sense? And what I find is that being passionate or fierce or firm is not the same thing as being spiteful or vengeful or hateful or punishing. And it's very important to know the difference, that it is possible to stand in groundedness and compassion and still be fierce. It can be absolutely necessary. When my son was really little, probably 3, 4 years old, he was fearless. And that was terrifying because he would dash out into the parking lot or something without a thought in his head about anything that might be endangering to his physical well-being as a little person. And so I was always trying to stop him from endangering himself and explaining to him why, not to do that. And during the time that his dad and I were getting a divorce, I was going to see a therapist, and she saw me interacting with my son at one time, and she said to me, "You talk too much." People have been telling me that all my life, but not in that context. She said, sometimes, rather than doing a big explanation, you need to say to him, "Luke, stop." Well, that didn't seem quite fair. But not long after that, we were at this big park with my mom, and we were heading back to the car, and he dashed out into the parking lot. Now, I had just had a conversation with my mother about being told that I talk too much in relationship to explaining everything to my son, trying to reason with a 4-year-old when what I needed to do was stop him. She says I talk too much, and my mother said without pause, "You do." So as we're heading to the car, and he dashed out into the parking lot, once again, I said, "Luke, stop." And he stopped. And I said to my mother, "It works." Now, I was definitely fierce in the moment. There was no humor in what I was doing at all, like there was just now. And he responded immediately. It was amazing to me that an explanation was not required in that moment. What was required was the action, decisive action. But it was taken with love, even in the midst of that fierceness. So this resistance, this pulling away from what is trying to pull us forward, or pushing against what's coming at us. But in this case, it's pulling away. We do that a lot too when we're afraid of the future. Or we're afraid of recreating the past. We tend to, in that case, resist what is trying to happen, what is wanting to happen next. Or perhaps we're resisting what has happened before. We don't want to repeat it. Or perhaps we're resisting something that frightens us. We don't yet know enough about it. Now, this is not to put down our instincts about danger. We should pay attention to those. In fact, we need to be very aware of those. But we do tend to react in our lives as if we're in life-threatening situations. A lot of times when it's just, that somebody's offering us something to eat that we're allergic to. We can have these kinds of fear reactions to the dumbest things. Not that allergies are dumb, but you know what I mean, right? It's not like somebody has a knife to your throat forcing you to eat something that's going to kill you. I came across this quote from Jane Rosen, who is an artist. I think this is so wonderful in terms of the idea of being receptive. She says, "To me, there is an invisible reality behind the visible reality. What I think it's supposed to look like, I have to let go of in order to see what it is. That demands attending to it. In other words, waiting, allowing the impression of the bird to come in rather than going out to it. It's a really subtle shift. The act of seeing is coming into an understanding of the whole of what's occurring. I'm talking about life. When we talk about taking in an impression, most of the time I'm not taking you in, I'm trying to make an impression on you. I'm going out. And there's a shift that happens when I'm drawing, or when I'm looking at the dog or a horse, or looking at someone in my mind's eye. There's a shift where something in me listens, but not with my ears. There's another kind of listening. This is receptivity. This is what we do with visioning. With visualization, we are taking our mind, our mentality, through an experience of something we want to manifest in our lives, what we want it to look like or sound like or feel like or be like in our experience. We're putting it out. With visioning, we're becoming a receptor to take in Spirit's vision. What is it really? What wants to happen? What is calling my name? What is offering itself to me to be received? It's a different kind of spiritual practice. And so the very last thing I'm going to leave you with today is from David Whyte, who's one of my favorite poets. He's an Irish poet who grew up in Yorkshire in England. And he's one of those people who goes on treks, or has in his life too, out-of-the-way places where there are ancient cultures and ancient religions. And one of the places he went was the Annapurna circuit. And he was in the Himalayas, in a little village called Braga, which I think is Tibetan Nepalese. And there is a temple at Braga that's very old. And inside, I haven't been there, but this is what I understand. Inside, around the perimeter of the wall, are wooden carved faces of Buddha in meditation. And they're all different, I guess. But before you enter into the temple, there is a fierce goddess, god, Buddha presence with a spear, as if daring you to come in. So he visited this place, and he wrote this poem called The Faces at Braga. In monastery darkness, by the light of one flashlight, the old shrine room waits in silence, while above the door we see the terrible figure, fierce eyes demanding, "Will you step through?" And the old monk leads us, bent back, nudging blackness, prayer beads in the hand that beckons. We light the butter lamps and bow, eyes blinking in the pungent smoke. Look up without a word. See the faces in meditation. 100 faces carved above. Eye lines wrinkled in the handheld light. Such love in solid wood. Taken from the hillsides and carved in silence, they have the vibrant stillness of those who made them. Engulfed by the past, they have been neglected, but through smoke and darkness, they're like the flowers we have seen through the dust of eroded slopes, then slowly opening their faces toward the mountain. Carved in devotion, their eyes have softened through age, and their mouths curve through delight of the carver's hand. If only our own faces would allow the invisible carver's hand to bring the deep grain of love to the surface. If only we knew, as the carver knew, how the flaws in the wood led his searching chisel to the very core. We would smile too, and not need faces immobilized by fear and the weight of things undone. When we fight with our failing, we ignore the entrance to the shrine itself and wrestle with the guardian, fierce figure on the side of good. As we fight, our eyes are hooded with grief, and our mouths are dry with pain. If only we could give ourselves to the blows of the carver's hands, the lines in our faces would be the trace lines of rivers feeding the sea, where voices meet, praising the features of the mountain and the cloud and the sky. Our faces would fall away until we, growing younger toward death every day, would gather all our flaws in celebration to merge with them perfectly, impossibly wedded to our essence, full of silence from the carver's hands. Receptivity is our true nature. So I send you out this week to receive. Namaste.